perspective in communication. So what do you mean by perspective? Our viewpoint, no? So in perspectives in communication, we will be discussing visual perception, language, and other factors affecting our perspective. So the past other factors includes our past experiences, prejudices, feelings, and environment. So when we say perspective, it means point of view. In each communication exchange, we bring our own filter to which how we see the world. You have your own pair of eyes and brain to interpret what you see, what you perceive with your senses. Our individual perceptions are the filter through which we communicate with others. So, in perspectives in communication, we will discuss again visual perception. So, visual perception, when we say visual, this is we use the sense of seeing, the sense of sight. So, what do you see? What do you see is different than others' point of view. What do you see? So, do you see a young woman? Or perhaps you see an old lady. If you see an old lady, can you see the young woman? If you see the young woman, can you see the old lady? So maybe some of you can only see a young woman, and some of you at first sight, they see an old woman. Both perspectives are possible and both are valid. So here, this is so it depends on what you look at, where you focus your eyes. So we are seeing the young woman turned away from us with just a hint of a profile visible. So you see here the eyelash and nose, chin and jawline, choker, necklace. So that's a young lady. But if our focus is different, we can see, if our focus, we see the right eyelash and left eye, and the nose, large hooked nose with wart on it, and then a mouth and chin. If that is where our eyes focused, then we see the old woman in profile. It seems her chin is tucked down into her chest, right? So both perspectives, both visual perception, point of views are valid. So they're simple two different ways of seeing the same thing. We cannot decide that one does not exist just because we don't see it. So we have to recognize that there is more than one way to perceive the picture, just like there is usually more than one way to see any situation we encounter. We cannot judge every person because they have different views than we have. No? So, bawal judgmental. What you see, that is your own perception. If the other person sees it differently, then respect. Okay, another perspectives is language. So perspectives in communication, another thing that we have to also learn is that the same with visual, we also experience different perspectives in language. So we all have cell phones, most of us have cell phones. Have you received a text message or FB message that seem to have different tone to it? And that tone is your basis on how you respond, right? So when you argue with your friend or your parents or your siblings, there is a certain tone in your text messages that tells the other person who's reading it that you're angry, right? So the same words can have different meanings depending on how we interpret them. So also this is an example of how it depends on who is decoding the message. Here, pause the video and read this phrase aloud. So if I'm going to read it, a woman without her man is nothing. So that's perhaps how you are also reading it. So what does it mean? It means that a woman is nothing without her man, right? That sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? Look again. If you add punctuation or change the word emphasis, how does the meaning change? Here, a woman without her man is nothing. So the same words, but there are just differences with period and commas. So that's how important when you write things, it is important to have the comma and the period and all those things because it gives meaning to what you are trying to say. The words were the same in both cases, right? But the meaning has now changed completely. And I totally agree with this. A woman without her, which means without the woman, man is nothing. Okay, we'll have another example here. I didn't say you were stupid. 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 So with that, the same wordings, but the word emphasis is different. So although we think our meaning may be clear when we use specific words in a certain order, we can't always be certain that the other person will read or hear them in that way, right? So it depends on, again, it depends also on the reader because the reader is interpreting what the sender is, what the message from the sender. So if you are a sender, you encode it properly. If this is what you, if you wanna, if make sure you know what is your goal in that message and that there will be no barrier of communication. What you want the other person to interpret it is the same as how the receiver interprets your message. The continuation of our topic, perspectives in communication. But first, look at the image on the background. You can see two individuals pointing at a number on the ground. One sees it as number 6 and the other sees it as number 9. Which of them is correct? We know that both of them are correct, right? Both perceptions are valid. They may argue about who's right and wrong, but for us, since we know that our perspective or point of views are different and it affects our visual perception, then we won't argue anymore. We understand. On the previous video about perspectives in communication, we discussed visual and language perceptions, right? That affects our perspective in communication. In this video, we will be discussing 4 other factors that also affects our perspective. We'll discuss past experiences, prejudices, feelings, and environment. These 4 affects our perspective. Past experiences. How does your past experiences affect your communication? So let's have an imagine game. Imagine that we are in the classroom setting and I group you into 3 groups to come up with a drama scene about childhood. So you group together and you converse each other, you communicate with one another. What will you be bringing to that conversation? What can you contribute to that conversation? So you might have examples of your own childhood experiences, right? And incorporate it in the drama scenes. So that is an example of how our past experiences affect our communication process. Another examples are, say, your mom has reacted negatively when you discussed a certain topic in the past. Say, you discussed to her about this girl that you met and she's like that and blah blah blah, and your mom reacted negatively about it. So the next time the resulting effect on communication, you hesitate to discuss the topic to your mom even if you needed her advice about such thing. Another example would be you got nervous the last time you gave a presentation in the classroom. So the resulting effect on communication, you start out even more nervous on your next presentation because your past experience affected how you feel on your next presentation because you don't want to experience it again. So the more you got nervous. So your past experiences affects your communication. Okay, prejudice. How does this affect our communication? Please watch this short video.
That's a really pretty drawing you got there. I was just complimentary, Johnny. I'm not a creep that's trying to get at you right now. Girls these days, you think every guy's after you. You have so much attitude, it's ridiculous.
So that's an example of prejudice. When we say prejudice, it means preconceived judgment or opinion. So when you say preconceived, before, like you're based on your past experiences, you judge the person not by the current situation, but because of your past experience or past experience. So we assume even before knowing a person. So in the video, the guy thought that the girl just doesn't want to talk to him, maybe because the girl thinks he's a creep that's trying to hit on her. And then, based on past experiences, he generalized all new generation girls, so thinks every guy is after them, and etc., etc., even if there's no response or feedback from the receiver of the message. So that is prejudice. When we are prejudiced, we are alienating or insulting someone with whom you are trying to build a relationship with. So prejudice are partly due to culture and partly due to personal preference or experience. So, like for example, in your neighborhood, you might have prejudice about your neighbor based on the stories that your family or your parents told you about your neighbor, even without knowing them personally. So, that is culture. Okay, when we categorize people like this, we eliminate their individuality. If you are communicating to a person through a perceived prejudice or stereotype, at the very least, you are greatly limiting the chances of your communication being successful or producing the desired result because you already judged the person. However, not all prejudices involve a negative characteristic. So there's also positive ones. Say for example, like bright man na siya, or when we see Chinese, we always think of them as negosyante, right? So since we know that prejudice or preconceived notion affects the way we communicate, our goal is to see each person as an individual that is separate from any preconceived notions we might have about them. So, treat that person a clean slate. Dili ka mo judge based on her appearance, based on her smell, or whatever. So, talk to them. This is the rule of thumb. Communicate in a way you want to be communicated. And don't communicate in a way you don't want to be communicated. So, if dili ka ganahan na i-judge ka, then also don't judge. Kay dili ka judge, right? Feelings. Feelings can affect our perspective in communication. So there are actually two ways in which your feelings can influence your communication with another person. First refers to the way that you feel on a given day. So if you feel well, you'll communicate in a way that in one way. And if you feel ill, you'll communicate on another. So if you feel tired or if you feel having some fever, then you communicate in a very lousy way, right? Also, second, it refers to how you feel about a specific person. So when you genuinely like someone, the way you communicate is going to show it. And if you don't like someone, then the way you communicate is also going to show that you don't like the person. Okay, environment, the last factor. So all of us communicate differently in different environments. When we say environment, it could be the setting, right? The context. This is simple enough to observe in everyday life. So, like, do you speak to your teachers the same way that you do to your friends? It's different, right? The way you communicate with your teacher and your friends is different. And the way you talk to strangers with more or less formality than people you know well, right? In the video, we know that the environment or the setting is a family gathering, and we can see the child is communicating intimately. She's whispering to the woman. We can tell that she is her mother, right? And there is also an old lady and an old man who are intimately communicating. So we can tell that they are a couple and are close to each other. So by just that, the environment affects our communication. We communicate differently when we are at church, in the church, also than we communicate in the disco house. That is the four factors that affects our perspective: the past experiences, prejudices, feelings, and environment.